Good evening, everyone. I'd like to open the meeting and welcome everyone to this ordinary meeting of Council for the 10th of April 2018. On behalf of Moonee Valley Council, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. We also extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who are here today with us. I'd like to advise members of the gallery that open session of this meeting are being recorded and live streamed on the internet. The recording will also be archived and made available on Council's webpage. Gallery attendees are advised that their presence may be recorded. Councillors, I don't believe we have any apologies tonight, and I believe Councillor Nation is running late, is he? Councillor Nation is now an apology. Okay, so we note down that Councillor Nation is an apology. Confirmation of minutes. Councillors, do I have any opposition to any item on the minutes for the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday, the 27th of March 2018? No? If there is no, the minutes are confirmed. So we will now proceed to declarations by councillors. Councillors, do we have any declarations tonight on any agenda on the item? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to declare a conflict of interest on item 9.4 Valley Lake area to a local area traffic management study due to residential property in the area.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Presentations. Councillors, do we have any presentations tonight, this evening? Yes, Councillor Gauchamarucci.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a banner from the Lions Club of Essendon on their 65th anniversary for Moonee Valley.
Thank you. We'll find space on some of our walls to hang it up on. Thank you, Councillor. Next agenda item is petitions and joint letters. Councillors, do we have any petitions or joint letters? No. Questions from the public. We now move to questions from the public, and I ask Ms Kendria Pope whether we have received any questions.
Yes, Mr Mayor. We've received 8 questions on a range of topics. We've received 2 questions from Brian Gillis and 2 questions from Miriam Gillis of Moonee Ponds. Are Brian and Miriam in the gallery? Yes. I'll hand that over to Steve Lambert, who's the Director of City Services, who will respond to each of your questions in the turn in which they've been received. Thanks.
So the first question was from Miriam. As councillors, have you held consultation meetings with residents in your wards in relation to the future of home and community care at Moonee Valley City Council? Councillors did not hold ward meetings. However, there's been extensive community consultation about this matter, including a postcard survey which was distributed to all aged care service recipients last year and which were made available at many events and activities during the Seniors Week Festival. We also had listening posts at the Seniors Festival where community members could leave their feedback about the federal government's reforms to the aged care sector. The outcomes of this consultation were reported back to the Council. Generally, the community understands that these reforms are being driven by another level of government and the Council wants the best outcomes for the clients, the community and staff. The second question, also from Miriam. As councillors, are you confident that any decision you make on home and community care tonight will be an informed decision? The Western Region councils have worked in partnership over the past 2 years to consider service delivery options available to our ageing communities. Councils have been briefed several times over the past 12 months about aged care reforms which are being driven by the federal government and what this means for Moonee Valley staff, clients and residents. Council and officers have been working towards a solution which provides continued care for our elderly clients and the best possible outcomes for staff and the broader community. The next 2 questions are from Brian Gillis. As councillors, are you aware of the preparation of tender documents for the transfer of business of home and community care before you vote on a decision tonight? Council officers have undertaken preliminary planning and preparation and have briefed council several times prior to putting forward a recommendation for council decision. This preparation has included the work undertaken with other Western Region councils. The second question. Councillors, before you vote on a decision tonight regarding the future of home and community care in Moonee Valley City Council, are you aware that home and community care staff will not receive a redundancy payment if they reject a position with a contractor under the transfer of business clause in the Moonee Valley City Council EBA? Council's main aim is to ensure ongoing employment of staff, to provide continuity of service for our clients and to mitigate redundancy. As part of the tender process, we'll be seeking an external provider that will take on all of our existing staff and their current entitlements and conditions so that no staff member is worse off under any new employer. The next question is from Barry Goff of Ascot Vale. Is Barry in the chamber this evening? Thank you, Barry. Have councillors been briefed on the impact of home care staff redundancy entitlements in the event that council contracts this service to an external agency? The staff are transferred to that agency as part of the transmission of business and the contract is not subsequently renewed by the federal government. And the answer is yes. Councillors have been briefed several times on this subject. As articulated in the previous response, as part of the tender process, we'll be seeking an external provider that will take on our existing staff and their current entitlements, including redundancy entitlements and conditions so that no staff member is worse off under a new employer. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we have a number of other questions to work through. We have 2 questions from Billy King of the Australian Services Union. I can see Billy in the gallery tonight, so we'll hand this question over and the responses to the Acting Director Organisational Performance, Petrus Barry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to the Billy King for the 2 questions. The first question is, have councillors been briefed on the proposed restructure in the Customer Services Unit? Councillors are aware of the commencement of the consultation process regarding the proposed change for the Customer Service Unit. Councillors have also been advised that the purpose of this change is to align service delivery with best practice in customer service contact centres. This includes having a dedicated team to deliver customer-centric projects, which will allow the operational team to focus on servicing our customers' needs. Councillors have been kept informed on the progress, however, are not directly involved in the details of the proposed restructure. The second question...
Sorry, Mayor, just as a point of clarification in relation to that, I'm trying to work out whether the answer to that is yes, because we haven't been briefed. So,
Mr Mayor, about 2 weeks ago there was an update that went out to councillors regarding this.
sorry, just wanted to clarify just because it was unclear, I think, in the response.
Thank you. I'll continue with the second question. Is that okay, Mr Mayor? As councillors, are you aware that the proposed restructure in the Customer Service Unit will lead to multiple job losses and have people doing the same work for less pay? The proposed Customer Service Unit restructure is to create an agile workforce to allow for the community to choose to interact with us, whether this is over the phone, in person or online, in such a way that we can respond efficiently and effectively. Councillors are aware that the consultation process has commenced and that Council is seeking feedback from staff and the Union to inform any decision being made. Councillors are not involved directly in the details of the proposed restructure, but acknowledge that to achieve the above outcome, roles and responsibilities will need to be reviewed. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just again, Mayor, I think this is really important that be clarified because that last point purported to be a statement on behalf of councillors, as I understood it, which is not the case. That's not my understanding. So, sorry, I have turned my mic on now. So I just want to be very clear that in relation to that last statement, Mr Barry, that's not my understanding.
That's fine, Councillor. We'll take that on board, and this will all be discussed in the confidential item later on.
No.
Sorry?
This is customer service.
Oh, customer service. Sorry, my apologies.
Mr Mayor, sorry, can I
Sure.
ask? There seems to be lots of questions directed towards councillors tonight. Is it worth, and I understand we don't want to be going into the operational boundaries, but just advising what we can do on Tuesday nights in terms of...
Yeah, well, I was going to let all the questions go through and then just do a little quick statement at the end about the forum next week.
Great.
Yep. That's fine. Next question?
Finally, we've received 2 questions from Rose Isa of Travancore. Rose, I think you're in the gallery tonight. I'll hand that over to Gil Richardson to respond, who is the Acting Director, Asset Planning and Strategic Projects.
Thank you. The question relates to the Flemington Housing Renewal project. Residents in Flemington have received a letter from the Minister, Martin Foley, dated the 4th of April, stating that I am pleased that the result of the consultation between Moonee Valley City Council and the Department of Health and Human Services is that we are now in general agreement on the built form outcome needed for this renewal. 193 submissions were made to the panel hearings on Amendment C 177, many of which were residents concerned about substantial increase in built form and density proposed for the site, and the significant loss of open space for existing residents. The Minister's letter states the planning scheme allows for approximately 1,050 dwellings to be built, subject to further planning approvals, of which at least 218 will be new public homes. The first question in relation to that context is Moonee Valley City Council now in general agreement on the built form outcome, and if yes, can Moonee Valley City Council clearly state what is this general agreement means? Whilst the amendment is generally consistent with Council's submission, it does not specifically address the community infrastructure needs identified in our submission, including public transport improvements and a new community hub. A report will be presented to Council in May-June outlining the key aspects of the planning scheme amendment and the advisory committee report and how the outcomes meet Council's original submission. Question 2. How will Council seek to advocate for public housing residents' interest to achieve the best outcome from the planning approvals process, given residents express concerns, the lack of information provided to the residents, and the removal of Council as the responsible authority for the area? The Council report will also outline next steps, including the need for the Department of Health and Human Services to prepare a detailed development plan for the site in partnership with Council and other key stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Before I move on to the next item, just in relation to your concerns, Councillor Marshall, I think I'm best if I inform the public in the gallery that next week at the public forum there can be more questions asked and answered, but if they are related to any staffing matters, then those questions will be directed to the CEO, who will then either delegate it to one of his officers or answer it themselves, whereas staffing matters is an operational matter which councillors really shouldn't be answering questions to.
Well then, Mayor, can I respectfully request that officers don't purport to make statements about what councillors' beliefs and understandings are then?
That's fine, no problem.
And I'd like to second that position of Councillor Marshall's, because it's a significant concern that we're being made to look and that we have made decisions where we haven't had a discussion.
Noted. Thank you. Okay, Council reports 9.1. Council reports on tonight's agenda is on page 4 and relates to a planning application 1 to 13 Fullerton Road, Airport West. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We don't have our screen working still, but I would like to move a refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sorais. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would you like me to read out the refusal?
Yes.
The Council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in relation to planning permit application number MV-924-2016 for the construction of 6 dwellings at 1 to 13 Fullerton Road, Airport West, Lot 1 on PS718354L in accordance with the following grounds of refusal. 1. The proposal does not comply with Clause 21.06-1 Neighbourhood Character, Clause 21.06-4 Objectives and Strategies Urban Design, and Clause 52.02 Neighbourhood Character and Infrastructure of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, as it would result in a development that fails to appropriately respond to its location and the surrounding context. 2. The proposal does not satisfy the following objectives and standards of Clause 55 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme. A. Clause 55.02-1 Neighbourhood Character Objective. B. Clause 55.03-1 Street Setback. C. Clause 55.04-1 Side and Rear Setbacks. D. Clause 55.04-7 Internal Overlooking. E. Clause 55.05-2 Dwelling Entry. F. Clause 55.05-3 Daylight to New Windows, and G. Clause 55.06-1 Design Detail Objective. 3. The location of the proposed vehicle crossover is inappropriate and will result in unreasonable traffic impacts to Fullerton Road and safety impacts to residents. 4. The proposed development presents an overdevelopment of the subject site due to the lack of consideration given to the siting of the dwellings and its response to its corner location.
Thank you, Councillor. Would you like to speak to the item now?
Can I breathe? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Soares, for seconding this refusal. As you will know, as you were in the consultation meeting with me, this is a subject site of 794 square metres in Airport West. However, it's in, all I can say is a bit of a doozy of a location. So if you're talking about an off-ramp, an on-ramp, a roundabout, Fullerton Road, McNamara Avenue, imagine the piece of land bang smack in the middle of that, and they want to put 6 dwellings on this relatively small piece of land. As a councillor, we have to look at everything that comes before us, but then when we see clear overdevelopment of a site, I think we need to call it out, and that's what I see as this. I see there are 4 areas of non-compliance with this particular application, including the site side and rear setbacks, the internal overlooking and the dwelling entry. I think the street side and rear setbacks speak for themselves, and I do understand that there can be some movement in that space, especially because they're going to be backing onto freeway effectively. But the one that really I think is a big issue for this development is the internal and external access. The way that the development is constructed is by having effectively the dwellings there with the underground car park, which is something that's quite new that's coming into Airport West, and on principle I don't mind that idea, but it does cause a big issue when you've got one car coming in, one car coming out. Where it's positioned with the school, with the freeways, with the streets, with the roundabout, it's just going to create a really unsafe environment, and that's one of the main reasons as this application. It just has a lot of red flags for me, and I think that without proper, I suppose, vision, with a bus parking there, with cars coming in and out, school kids, there's enough areas here that we can refuse, areas of non-compliance. If this was to be taken to VCAT, I honestly think that we would have a really good chance of having a much better result on this land. Thank you.
Councillor Soares.
Thank you, Mayor. Just following on from Councillor Byrne, my concerns are that this application seeks more than 50% of the site coverage. Whilst I wasn't able to attend the planning consultation on the 11th of December, I have read through the report. I visited the site. This site is predominantly surrounded by older style single dwellings. As Councillor Byrne has said, it is at an intersection which is a very hectic and busy intersection and quite dangerous. I'm concerned about the visual bulk of 6 double stories being placed on this site. It does say in the report that it has good access to public transport. Let me tell you that there's a bus stop outside this site, and that's about the only public transport accessible in the area, unless you can make your way further down to Keilor Road and get a tram. I believe that it will present a dominant built form. The report says that it doesn't. The height and development at 2 stories is consistent with the prevailing built form within the surrounding area. I totally disagree with that. As I said, it is surrounded by older style single story dwellings. Further up the road there are a couple of double story dual occupancies, and possibly in time those older dwellings will become a developer's dream and they will put in applications for dual or triple development of double story dwellings on the site. Table 4 in the Res Code standard says in clause 55.031, standard B6 street setback. The proposed front setback to Fullerton Road of 2.8 to 4.7 metres does not comply with the 4 metre setback requirement of this standard. I would be very concerned about traffic concerns at that intersection of McNamara Avenue. So I have supported the refusal on the basis that I believe this is an overdevelopment on the site. It is out of character with the area, and I think perhaps if they came back with a couple, maybe 3 singles at the front, 2 at the back, maybe we could perhaps consider that would be a more appropriate type of development there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to speak to this item? Councillor Cusack.
Sorry, Mayor, I just can't let it go by that somewhere along the line, developments of this ilk are not appropriate for a number of, if you like, almost hidden reasons. I know that I'm drifting a long way from the discussion of what is in res code and planning and so on like that. But when you look at the long term and you think, what is this development going to appear like in the future? And I get an impression of a group of buildings that are almost an island, surrounded by incredibly busy roads, that means that you don't get that community connection and the capacity for people to be able to roll out and find neighbours. The only neighbours you'll ever have are those few people who live inside with you in those 6 dwellings. The other part of that is that there is a cumulative health issue in living in an environment of this ilk. Again, I know that doesn't cut the ice with VCAT and it doesn't go very far in terms of res code and planning. But somewhere along the line, making every post a winner in the development stakes is not quite the way we should be going. Even if we did some modifications to this, even if VCAT did some modifications to this, I would always be concerned that we're not actually doing and delivering something that is good urban design, that is about a future for Airport West, or a statement about what we consider is appropriate living spaces for our community.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Byrne, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just thank you for your support, Councillor Sorais and Councillor Cusack. I just did want to add in relation to something Councillor Sorais said, that the application was lodged prior to the 27th of March 2017. So for those in the gallery and those that are tuning in tonight, that's why there is such so much bulk on the land, I suppose, because the application was put in before the state government's new rules and regs in terms of garden area. So if this application was put in today, it wouldn't have got to this stage, but it was put in so long ago. Hopefully this is the last one that we have to deal with, but that's so be it. They got their application in, but we won't be seeing too many more of these really highly density, plonking them all in. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.2 on tonight's agenda is on page 23 and is related to a planning application at 116 Glass Street and 2 Winifred Street, Essendon. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauci-Marucci?
Mayor, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with an additional condition, please.
Sure. Would you like to read that out?
With the insertion at 1I, the deletion of dwellings 11 and 12. Thank you.
It's done? Okay. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Gauci, would you like to speak to the item?
I will. This is one that I still have a lot of uncertainty about. There's many things I don't like about this proposal, and that is evident through the heavy use of conditioning. So things like setbacks that weren't compliant, all of those aspects have mostly been addressed through conditioning, but the deletion of dwellings 11 and 12 is a really important one for us, because this responds to the need to reduce the visual bulk, but also in terms of the open space next door at 118 Glass Street, and it means that there is less site coverage as well, which is important. In terms of the proposals that come towards us, this is compliant on parking, which is not quite common. There certainly were amended designs submitted on the 21st of February, which are what this is for approval of, and that those altered plans respond to the concerns of some residents on Warner Street in terms of the setback of that building and the overlooking there, and also respond to some concerns around the traffic and the layout of the basement. They were covered in the alterations of 21st of February. So certainly when I think about what I'd like to see on this site, there are many different versions of what we could see on this site. Deleting dwellings 11 and 12 gives us a better outcome than we might possibly get if we went to VCAT with a refusal. So,
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an interesting site in that it brings, as a development, a T-shaped site development, which is essentially quite unusual, I would think, in terms of development sites within the municipality. However, taking some of the aspects that Councillor Gauci-Marucci has mentioned, the built form of the proposal is consistent with the state and local planning laws. However, there is an overall height that's above the local DDO, and although it does meet the Moonee Valley planning scheme, which the GRZ allows for a 11 metre impact height, it does not respond to the neighbourhood character of Glass Street, and that is a concern. The setbacks which were originally proposed have been since amended, which I'm glad to see, because they were impacting both in Winifred and in Glass Street, and they didn't comply and now they do. So I can only be grateful for that. The 13 3-bedroom and 5 4-bedroom is a good size mix in terms of the type of development that we have in that area, which if one was to go down Winifred Street, there's a lot of 2-bedders and 1-bedder type developments that exist side by side all the way down Winifred Street, and not necessarily a great thing, but that's what we've got now. But at least these are 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom, and in that regard it does propose a development that will bring families of a different ilk than what we'll see in Winifred Street by itself. So I think that's a great thing. And there's also sufficient parking, although I do hesitate when I say that, because 4-bedroom apartments are a potential minefield, shall we say, in terms of parking, because we could end up with 4 cars, we could end up with even more than 4 cars, and in each of these apartments, 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, they only allow 2 car parks off-site. And where do the other cars end up? Of course, they end up in our streets, and that just creates more congestion that we're trying to avoid in Moonee Valley. Permeability does not meet the requirements with only 5.8% as mentioned, and that's in the report, and that's a concern. So in some ways I'm in favour, and other ways I'm not in favour of this development. It is in an area that meets with
Time's up.
just half a second, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and it does meet the local transport needs, as well as within a local amenity area. So it's a difficult one, but I get, at the end of the day, I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you. I acknowledge the efforts made through this alternative recommendation tonight, but I can't vote for such a large development being built in this location. The proposal is far too big and bulky. Viewed from the east, this building will go from the front of the block right to the very back of the block. I take it that this alternative will slightly reduce this by deleting 2 dwellings, but there remains no separation between the individual apartments on either the Winifred Street side or the Glass Street side, and I believe it is a gross development of a site within a residential area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Marshall.
The difficulty with this one, and we have this as an issue that pops up constantly, is that again, when the activity centre boundaries are drawn to include properties within there, that you highlight them as areas where development is to occur, and that's the difficulty we have with this one. I certainly would agree with a number of the matters that Councillor Sharp has raised, but I think with the attempted conditions, including the additional conditions that that Councillor Gauci-Marici has included in her motion, compared with the officer recommendation, I think that this will probably get us to a point where certainly not something we like, but it will be improved from potentially if we were to refuse this as is and the existing plans were sent off to the tribunal to be adjudicated on, we may end up with a worse outcome. So on balance, in light of the overall level of compliance, I'll be supporting the motion put forward by Councillor Gauci-Marici.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
Just a brief word, Mayor, thank you. I do note, and I know there's no room for irony in the comments made by councillors, officers in their reports, but I do find it ironic on page 34 that we're talking about the contemporary in style and reflective of the emerging character in the surrounding area. I don't know that there's, yes, it is emerging, I don't know that it's one that is totally endorsed by all of the locals in the local area. Having said that, unfortunately, I think its location means that clearly there's going to be something built there. I take the points of that Councillor Marshall made, that if we rope in too much into these activity centres, we create this noose for our necks. And this is classically one of those that relates to Glass Street. Winifred has always been under some pressure, obviously. But so while I am not happy with the whole proposal, I suppose I also have to take the lessons learnt that sometimes you've got to take a little bit and get a little bit out of the game. And so whether we would fight this successfully in a VCAT context, I'm very unsure. It's got a level of compliance that is there by the rule book that doesn't necessarily do anything for the community, but unfortunately that's the way we might have to play this. And so I will be supporting your motion, Councillor Gauci-Marici, but I'm trying to express a level of reluctance in doing so.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Gauci-Marici, would you like to close?
Just briefly, just to touch on Councillor Cusack's point, I think all of us have a level of reluctance, but it is the least worst alternative if that's a possibility. So if we can move forward with something that we are prepared to live with, certainly its proximity to Winifred Street is something that means that emerging character is something we have to consider compared to the other end of Glass Street. So certainly it is not ideal, but it is a better outcome than we could have otherwise had. So.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. All those in favour?
Councillors Marshall, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici, Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Soros, Councillor Sharp.
Councillor Sypek.
And Councillor Sypek.
Thank you. Councillors, next report is on 9.3 on tonight's agenda items on page 45 and is entitled East Keilor Leisure Centre Redevelopment Schematic Designs. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Race, yes. Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne. Councillor Soros, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a major, significant future development for the city of Moonee Valley. Council have engaged other... I'd just like to firstly say that this is actually supporting a schematic design as put forward by the officers and consultants that have been engaged. So this will be, of course, something to be worked upon for future consultation with the community. So council have engaged other consultants to progress the project. So whilst I'm not a huge keen person on engaging consultants, this particular project is significant in nature and cost, and therefore warrants further professional input from outside sources. The revised project estimate differs to the original estimate, which accompanied the concept plan endorsed by Council on the 23rd of August 2016. And one of the reasons was that the impact on the administration area requirements would be designed to accommodate community use of the space, and if that part of area was not used for administration purposes, the community would have access to that. So whilst a significant increase in the estimated cost for the new car park layout has been put to us, the initial concept provided for 86 spaces, whereas now the schematic design would provide for 200 spaces. So there's been some vast improvements in the changes together with the consultations that have taken place. Provisional sums have been allocated to items that were listed that were excluded in the 2016 cost plan. And as far as value management is concerned, the Council would have further opportunities to review the East Keilor Leisure Centre project during the phases of workshops and presentations to Council, and prior to the award of the contract when tenders for the construction have been received. So under our Council Plan 2017-21, Council is committed to redeveloping East Keilor Leisure Centre by June 2021, and let me say is well overdue. This facility is beyond its out of use by date, let me tell you. Just as far as consultation goes with the community, so community consultation and engagement will be undertaken with all stakeholders during the coming months, and a communications plan is also being prepared to provide timely information to the community and stakeholders. So let's get the ball rolling on the East Keilor Leisure Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and Councillor Sorais covered off most of the points, which is great. This is obviously a huge infrastructure, huge project for Moonee Valley, and it's very exciting that it's finally coming. It has been a long time coming. Can I just ask for a point of clarification from whoever is best to answer in regards to who will be a part of the project working group that's listed in the report? Okay, well, you don't know whether it'll be open to all community members?
I believe that there is a draft consultation group already been formed, but I'll have to come back to you with the names that are actually on it. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. So that's something that I haven't been aware of as of yet, but I think that it is really important for people in the community who want to be involved in the next step, that they should be able to. But we'll obviously, as it's been taken on notice, we'll be able to find out. But let's be frank here, we've started off at it was always going to be a big project, 37.5 from memory, and now we're up towards the $50 million. But if we're going to do it once, we want it to last for the next 50 years plus. We want to do it right. So yes, the costs are more, but we're going to end up with exactly what we want. It was more than just obviously the car parking. We've got a really adequate, more than adequate, it's going to be brilliant, aquatic space. There's a lot of contingency put into that money as well. So whilst it might seem like it's a $50 million build, it's what the residents of Moonee Valley deserve. So I'm looking forward to the next piece in the puzzle coming together, and we'll eventually get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Got Councillor Marshall.
I'm rising to speak in support of the motion, but I do have to express my reservations about the cost issue. And I suppose it's about that sense, picking up on some of Councillor Byrne's points, around how we manage these types of big projects, because when we first started talking about this some years ago, it was $20 million. And again, I think everyone is in heated agreement that this is something that needs to be done. This is at end of life. I've not yet to meet a single person who has disagreed with that point. But when you start getting this sense that we go from 20 million to 37.5 to 50, you do start thinking, where does this end? And this is how sometimes I really think we need to give greater consideration about, where possible, staging projects, but also being mindful about when we go out to consultation, because if you ask people what do they want, they will of course pick the best option, because that's what human beings do. But maybe when we go out to consultation on these projects, talk about, okay, well, if this is the budget and these are the things that you can choose between, so you can have this or you can have that, I think we probably need to start looking at our consultations a bit differently, because the difficulty is we go out, and in this instance there have been a number of consultations and very long process, and of course you get back the gold-plated option, because that is what people want. But our ability to actually pay for these enormous projects, and there are many things, as we know, in Moonee Valley that need to be done. And certainly in my part of the world we've got significant growth and significant infrastructure demands. We really need to, I think, become a bit smarter about the questions that we ask, and we need to be able to be frank and honest with our community and say, this is what we can afford. So if it means that we can afford these particular parts or this particular parts, which parts do you want? But otherwise, it's a project that needs to be done, and I'm sure the community will be very much looking forward to it being done.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I speak frankly about this, and I must admit I'm not comfortable with this huge spend. It's a massive commitment from this council that it doesn't have a $50 million debt at the moment. It's an increase in cost from, as Councillor Marshall mentioned, from 20 million to 37 to 50 million now. And we need to wonder what extra costs will blow out that it doesn't recognise at the moment. Could it be 60 or 70? That's a hole in the ratepayers' pockets, and that is a major concern for me. There's non-capital costs which are detailed in the report of the project: POS system and technology for sales management models, facility closure and reopening, marketing and communication, actual funding costs in terms of interest and principal repayments. And also a creation of a master plan in Quinn Grove, which hasn't been included. These are extra costs on top of what the $50 million is. So let's be very clear: it will not be just $50 million, or close enough. Other issues that also concern me are, and these are just questions I ask myself with a project such as this, is what's the income forecast for the investment of $50 million in the East Keilor Leisure Centre? What are we going to get back? What is the income going to be? I haven't seen one figure yet from council officers as to tell me what that will be. All I've heard is we'll maybe break even after 3 years. Well, hello. And how does council plan to actually repay the $50 million? With what? Again, it hasn't been detailed to me, and I look forward to getting those figures. How will council raise new income streams within the municipality to pay for the $50 million plus? $50 million plus. Let's be very clear about that. It's not $50 million, it's $50 million plus. And again, I'd love to see those figures, because I'm just asking the hard questions, and call me hard-headed or hard-hearted, as some people like to call me. But I really feel that is an issue we need to see the bottom of. So these are questions, they're serious questions, and we need serious answers and concrete answers, not just pie-in-the-sky stuff, because this council is making a huge commitment to the future, and we won't be able to do anything else if this is what we're stuck with, and this is the millstone round our neck for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other? Councillor Gauci-Marici.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Neither speaking for or against. At this point, I, similar to other councillors, have significant concerns. In the nearly 2 years we've been on council, year and a half, the costs have literally doubled. And for me, I know that parts of that are things are costed better than they were, but other parts of that are because we have responded to the squeakiest wheel who wanted the shiniest item or the bigger pool or the extra lane. And for me, looking at how we use our ratepayer money, I don't think it's about a return on investment. I don't think you're going to make a massive return on investment out of a leisure centre. And I don't think that we should be reviewing projects based on making profit, because that's not what about providing services to the community is. But there's part of me that says this is an incredible amount of money for a project that we desperately need, but is it too much money? So for me, I still haven't decided whether I support it or not yet, so hopefully I'll make that decision in the next 5 minutes.
Councillor Cusack.
I support the project, and I support the motion that's before us tonight, because there are a number of steps that have got to be taken before you can put a shovel in the ground, and this is part of moving towards that or fulfilment of that promise. I suppose, I mean, I wouldn't be sitting in this council unless I shared a concern about the costs and so on like that for this development. But it is not a proposal that is so out of skew with what we've seen with other councils and in other areas that have gone down this track and have developed similar centres. And the location in East Keilor, while I would love to see something like that down in my neck of the woods, because poor old Ascot Vale Leisure Centre, which is often maligned, is just never going to be able to cut the mustard with a great big brother up on the other end of the town. However, we talk about the modelling there has been a lot of modelling done by council officers in the economic return on this proposal. And while there is, yes, some nervousness about borrowing, we can, the modelling that I've seen that has been discussed in the lead-ups to our considerations about budget and so on like that, have clearly shown that there is, yes, a risk, but it's a moderate risk that is spread out over some years, that is not altogether one big bang theory. The return on the gate, no one's quite sure. But the experiences of other places is that they're very seldom undersubscribed, and that there's more often the case things like the gymnasiums and those other things and the children's play areas, which are a new part of every swimming complex now. It's the 50-metre pool is an adjunct almost to all of these other things, are in fact quite the honeypot. I think also we're selling ourselves short. While there's a big figure there, we haven't factored in, nor anybody has mentioned, that there are government subsidies and there's possible grants and so on like that of some millions of dollars which can potentially bring this price down. So there's a number of issues there, and it's rather than being totally conservative, I would like to be somewhat conservative. Of course, that's a thinking thing you have to do for all activities that this council does, and you measure risk. But the long-term benefit for the health and the offsets that come with people that are in a better place and that our community is is better served for the next 50 plus odd years is something that I don't think we should be stepping away from. And given the fact that the pool's just about to fall apart, what are you going to do? Sit there and look at it? Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Before closing, I'd just like to say a few words as well. I've been watching and being on council over the last quarter of a century, and I've heard these kind of alarmists comments coming up. And a good example is the old clock tower. If anyone remembers many years ago, the clock tower used to have squash courts in there. And the mayor at that time, I can't remember exactly who it is, but he went out and borrowed $8 million. And back then it was, we were going to break the bank and we were going to lose, and everyone was going to go bankrupt and all that. Never happened. Worked out well. Council, Moonee Valley Council, Resident Council always pays their bills. When Ascot Vale Leisure Centre, that's when I first got on the council, that was also in the millions, and also the same alarms were being called out back then. But we've paid that off as well too. So, and I've heard comments from both sides were saying that, this has gone from 20 to 30 to $40 million. Well, I remember back in 2004 when I got on council, we were talking then about redeveloping East Keel Leisure Centre. And if we developed it in 2005 or 2006, yeah, it probably would have costed about $80 million. But prices do go up, and if you just have a look at real estate in Moonee Valley, I mean, 20 years ago you could buy a house in East Keel for $150,000. Can't buy one now for under $1 million, no way. So it's all relative, ladies and gentlemen, it's all relative. So I'm in favour of this motion, and happy to leave it at that. Councillor Byrne, would you like to close? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sorais, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for all your input. It's all been noted and very, very valuable for such a large project. Councillor Cusack's actually probably stolen most of my closing comments with regards to government subsidies and grants and looking at the long-term benefit of the health and wellbeing. Also the responses to this, whilst we've been asking for community feedback, they are ratepayers. So they are I'm sure they would be quite pleased to be contributing to something that can be shared amongst the whole municipality that they are contributing to themselves. So Council will have further opportunities to review the cost of the East Keel Leisure Project during the phases of workshops and presentations to the Council that are coming up with a detailed design from April to July this year, and prior to the award of the contract when tenders for the construction have been received, which would be towards the end of 2018. So I would hope that the Council support this recommendation as put forward by the officers, and that we can continue to move forward for this large and significant project. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? All those in favour?
Councillors Sorais, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack.
All those against?
Councillor Gachi-Marucci, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, councillors. Council report 9.4 on tonight's agenda is on page 53 and is entitled Valley Lake Local Traffic Management Study. And councillors, I believe Councillor Byrne has a...
Thank you, Mr Mayor, yes.
Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sorais.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Sorais, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's basically just a draft traffic management plan for the Valley Lake 2A local area traffic management study. There have been consultation taking place with community groups. I've had a couple of meetings with our traffic engineers, and also I think we might have been representative from Traffic's group as well on that. Basically, it is a draft traffic management plan, and that will go out to consultation. Once we've received all the feedback, then further submissions will be made.
Councillor Sharp. No. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Marshall.
Briefly, Mayor, noting that it is going out for consultation, so I'm happy to support that, and I really will be interested in what the feedback from the community is, because there are things in here that I know, if they were happening in our part of the world, would not be well received in the slightest. But I'm also very mindful that the people who live with the conditions are well placed to work out whether they will be things that work for their particular area. And certainly the ward councillors who are involved in the LATMs also are well placed to do that. So we'll await eagerly the feedback.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Sorais, would you like to close?
Thank you. It's really, as I said, it's a study for the purpose of public consultation, and following the completion of that consideration of all the feedback, then council will make that decision. Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? All those in favour?
Councillors Sorais, Sharp, Marshall, Cusack, Gauci Marucci and Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Sypek.
Thank you. Council. Oh yes, Councillor Boone has to come back. Council Report 9.6 on tonight's agenda is on page 82 and is entitled Report of Assembly of Councillors. Councillors, do I have a motion?
And 9.5.
Oh, sorry, 9.5. Yes, I do. I do apologise.
My number is out the same as the
Yeah, sorry. 9.5 on tonight's agenda is on page 77. Is entitled Update on Notice of Motion number 2017-808, Large Gum Trees in Keilor East and Avondale Heights. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sorais. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I believe this has actually come from one of the notice of motions that you brought into the council year last year. And it came back with quite a comprehensive report, which for anyone who is interested in trees, or trees specifically in Keilor East or Avondale Heights, it's a very comprehensive report and an interesting read. I'll leave it at that. Basically, I'm sure that everyone around this table and listening on live streaming in the gallery understand the importance of trees. We love trees here on council. We encourage planting them. There are so many benefits to having trees.
Bee friendly too.
Bee friendly trees, absolutely. I suppose, unfortunately, in our neck of the woods, there's often significant damage that can happen to the footpaths. And then it's weighing up the benefit of the tree and the impact that the roots and whatnot of the tree are doing to the footpaths and people's fences and properties. And so basically this report comes back with a report on 274 trees within the area and how much damage they potentially are or are not doing. It's quite interesting, but I think one of the main things to come out of it is plant the right tree in the right place. And I think, and you'll probably touch on it, I'm assuming maybe in your comments, but a lot of the trees were planted a long time ago in the old Keilor Council, and probably not the best pick of trees, and not necessarily what we would be planting now. And so I think, based on this report, there are only going to be 2 trees more than likely removed in terms of ones that are causing significant issues. That's not to say that the other trees are perfect, but it's about looking forward and making sure that in the future we're planting appropriate trees on nature strips, because as we've said before, we do love the trees. We see the definite benefits for the community, and that often outweighs the negatives of what they can do to the footpaths. And we just need to make sure we make good decisions in the future in regards to our trees. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne. Councillor Sorais.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. But quite clearly what this recommendation does, it provides a consistent framework to enable management of the trees and their potential conflict with infrastructure, and it provides options for the removal of problem trees along with mitigation opportunities to address potential damage.
Any other councillor? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Trees are very close to my heart, and I think it's sad when we remove any tree that could potentially remain, particularly a fully grown one, as we've seen in Buckley Street, of course. Some trees were removed there, which was very sad. However, at least a good assessment of these trees in the East Keilor and Avondale Heights area has been done, and one that we need to certainly consider carefully, and I'm sure council officers have done that, where nature strips and people's property is being damaged as a direct response from root damage and the like, and that has clearly been stated in the report. So I think it's a good motion to a degree. It doesn't remove all the gum trees in East Keilor, and I'm glad that's been a precursor to this. However, there will be some removed as a consequence of this report, and maybe that's for the benefit. I'm sure our forefathers in Keilor Council didn't quite know what they were planting way back when, and that as a consequence of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Cusack.
Just quickly, Mayor, this proposal, and I accept it and support the recommendation and the work that's been done by the council officers, but underpinning all of this has to be those environmental values that we need to ensure that we have things like the urban forest contributing to how the trees can work towards cooling our properties, making our areas that we live in a much more rational area. We know from presentations by the, not all that long ago, from Melbourne University's botany area and forestry area, that the western suburbs are poorly served in terms of tree canopy. And the consequence of that is that we are a much hotter place than in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. So any contribution that the council makes now has to be in that context, rather than considering just what is a nice thing to do with a tree in front of a house, which has been the driver for many, many years. You know, oh, it's a bit too big, I think we'll chop it down. It drops berries all over the place, we'll chop it down. Those have been the drivers in the past. The context has to be a broader environmental thing that is working for the whole of our community, not just in those small, very much I am sort of places.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Byrne, would you like to close?
Oh, sure, you're going to put your two bobs worth in there.
Everything's been said.
Look, I think that we're all reading this report the same way, so it's very clear and a great read. We do have a tree management strategy, 2013 to 2017, that people can also refer to, and I think that it is quite good that of 274 we're keeping 272. I think that really shows that Moonee Valley does really want to stay green and beautiful, which is obviously aligned to our council plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.6 on tonight's agenda is on page 82 and is entitled Report of Assembly of Councillors. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sorais, moving the officer's recommendation. Councillor Lawrence, seconding it. Councillor Sorais, would you like to speak to the item? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item? Any other councillor to speak? Councillor Sharp.
I've just got a point of clarification, if that's okay, Mr Mayor. Just reading the conflict of interests, in most of them that's described as such and such has a conflict of interest and left the meeting during discussion of this item. I'm just being pedantic, but shouldn't it be prior to discussion of this item? Mm-hmm. They all pretty much read like that when that sentence is there.
Could we get that corrected?
Certainly.
Ms. Pope?
Does that need to be included on?
No, we'll just correct it as an administrative typing error. That should be fine.
Can we do that?
Yep.
Okay.
Any other councillor like to speak to the item? That's very well spotted. Obviously, you can say you can read the reports. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Sorais, would you like to close?
No, just put the motion, thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Notice of motion, councillors. Next item is business is notice of motion, and we have no notices of motion listed on tonight's agenda. So I'll move to urgent business. Do we have any urgent business, councillors? No urgent business. Next, the next item is business is confidential reports. And councillors, we have one confidential report this evening. So councillors, do I have a motion that the meeting goes into camera to consider this matter, which contains information relating to industrial matters? Councillor Sorais.
Mr Mayor, I move the council resolve to close the meeting to the public pursuant to section 89(2) of the Local Government Act 1989 to discuss the following matters, being aged care services at Moonee Valley City Council.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor, would you like to speak to the item?
No, just to close the meeting.
Councillor? Okay, that's fine. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? All those in favour?
Councillor Sorais, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Lawrence,
All those against?
Councillor Marshall, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Gauchi-Marucci.
Thank you. So we will now go into camera. So councillors, I will now ask the gallery to leave, as this is now, we're moving into a confidential item, and I'd like to thank our live streaming audience for viewing in, as we'll go now into a confidential report which will be discussed in camera. So thank you and good evening.